Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today on this Future Friday event. I'm Donna Lev with the X Future, and today I'm going to be interviewing Matthieu Hug from Tilkal. I think, Matthieu, you're based in France today, right? And for the last 4
Yes,
years
absolutely.
with your startup. And Matthieu is both a serial entrepreneur. So you've had the chance to essentially experience the entrepreneurial life to its essence, and then also experience the corporate life when your company was bought by Fujitsu. So you've had quite extensive corporate experience for, I think, 3 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Tilkal is essentially a blockchain and data intelligence for supply chain traceability and transparency. And I think I would love to, in your words, Matthew, hear a little bit about what you do at Tilkal.
Yeah, sure. So hello, Donna. Hello, everyone. So yeah, as you mentioned, Donna, I'm a repeat entrepreneur, so to speak. So I started the first company back in 2007. Were in the cloud space, and the company was eventually acquired by Fujitsu in 2013. And I spent some time in Fujitsu. I invested in different companies, and then I was at some point I was crazy enough to think that it was I just wanted to jump back into the swimming pool of entrepreneurship. Um, so frankly I come from digital technologies, and I'm really fond of technology. So the way I took the question of starting another company was led by two things. First one was uh, like probably anyone in his 40s, I wanted to have an impact. I didn't want to do yet another company that has been seen hundreds of times. I wanted to try to have an impact on important issues on the planet. And second, I was driven by technology. So I was like, well, what technology have enough promises to be changing the way we operate, and change the way we work. And we're back in 2015, and eventually blockchain started to be quite a big thing. So I started to investigate that, and I heard that blockchain could be used for supply chains and to organize traceability. And when you first hear that, normally, if you don't know much about supply chains, which was my case at that time, you're like, well, but traceability. I mean, like everybody has been doing traceability for like the last 40 years, right? I mean, they can't possibly be anything to be done on that subject. And then you start investigating, and what you realize that when you start investing in that there are actually quite a few dysfunctions on the way supply chains operate today. And these dysfunctions can be seen through different lenses. One typically is counterfeiting. People tend to think that counterfeiting is a problem for luxury goods or for pharmaceuticals. But actually counterfeiting is an issue for absolutely every single kind of product that we consume on the planet. To give you an idea, so as you said, I'm from France. To give you an idea, in Europe, in 2016, 7% of all imports into the European Union was or contained counterfeiting product. 7% of imported products, that's one product out of 15. That's absolutely huge. And that's the same in the US, that's the same everywhere. And that concerns food products, pharmaceuticals, electronic devices, car parts, plane parts, name any kind of product, it's concerned with that. And then when you keep going on and look at what happened on supply chain, then you realize that on some supply chains you can have involvement, especially on raw materials, you can have involvement of pretty important environmental issues. You can have involvement of illegal labor, like child labor, some kind of slavery, etc. These are all issues of our time, and they have quite some magnitude, to be honest. So when you start opening that, it's just like fascinating in the sense that there are really important things to be solved for supply chains and to make our supply chains cleaner. And that's important because supply chains are actually literally speaking, the engine of the economy. So when you start investigating supply chain and traceability, it's like you have this big car, which is the economy, and you open the truck and you start investigating into the engine. And that's again, it's really a fascinating world. There's a lot to be done, and that's how I came into having the idea that digital technology and among them blockchain can actually have a significant impact to improve the way our supply chain operates.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing this with me. And so I think what I want to hear a little bit, so you told us a lot about how you got into it, right? What kind of like the first steps, the baby steps into that journey. I want to hear about essentially the problem. Let's put aside Tilkal for a second and hear about the problem in the industry, because you gave us some hints, and now let's dive into it.
Yeah, sure. So the way I see it, when if you ask anyone, or if you ask a strategy consultant to design a supply chain, you end up with a fairly simple scheme of a value chain with a few steps that go one after the other. I collect raw materials, I transport them, I do some transformation in my factory, I transport again to a store, and then it's delivered to the consumer. That's true for very simple supply chains, and that used to be true 20 years ago or 40 years ago. Today, that's not the way supply chains are built. Supply chains are extremely complex environments where you have a great deal of subcontracting. A really good example of that we all know is in transport. When you ask a logistician to transport your goods, there is, like, very commonly anywhere between 4, 5, 6 levels of subcontracting between the company with which you contracting the transport and the guy who's actually driving the truck to take in charge your goods. So the operational reality is that you don't know who is transporting your goods. And you can repeat that depending on the industries, on manufacturing. You can repeat that in distribution. It really depends on the different industries, but the reality that supply chains have become extremely complex environment where you can have anywhere between 10 to 100 different tiers between the very original raw material and the end customer. And when you are industrial today, almost again in any industry, you basically know your tier 1 suppliers. You might have some knowledge of who are your tier 2 suppliers, upstream and downstream. But above tier 2, nobody knows anyone. So then you have this picture, you have these supply chains who include 10 to 100 different tiers. And when you are an industrial, you are like the brand owner, you basically know tier 1 and eventually tier 2. But you have 10 to 100 tiers. So the vast majority of your supply chain, you absolutely don't know what happens for real. And when you don't know what happens, you know what shit happens. That's just how it works, right? Either you control or or anything can happen. And that's really what is happening today. To put a few numbers on that, I mentioned counterfeiting on the imports into the European Union. But for instance, there was a study from an NGO which was relayed by the World Economic Forum like a year ago, a year and a half ago, probably a year and a half ago. It was probably right before COVID. It was about fish and generally speaking, sea products in the US. And the evaluation of the study was that about 25% of sea products distributed in the US were counterfeited, in the sense that either they were not what was written on the label, either they were mislabeled, or they were fed with a non-allowed product, or they were not fish at all. 25% of sea products in the US. Can you imagine that? That's absolutely amazing.
I couldn't, but then recently, or just in the last 2 days, there was a research that came out that tuna that's sold in Subway is just not tuna. So what you're saying actually does resonate.
Yeah. And when you start investigating, then the problem takes different forms, but it's actually very pregnant. For instance, avocado is a pretty well-known issue. Avocado first is an environmental disaster. It consumes one avocado needs about 20 much as time water as a tomato. And avocado are grown a lot, for instance, in Mexico, where they have a tendency to transform land into deserts because of the quantity of water that they require. But on top of that, avocado has grown very quickly, both in volume and in price over the last 20 years, because it's like so trendy. We all want guacamole for our appetizers. And the consequence is that in some, especially in Mexico, a large part of the production of avocado is controlled by armed groups. So like drug groups, etc. That's kind of an issue, right? I mean, I think that most of us just don't want to buy products that at the end have a financial outcome for armed group, right? We don't want that. But it does happen. And it does happen because it's so difficult to trade that, and it's so difficult to know what happens. So if you look at it from a very broad perspective, that the issue is that big problem of dysfunction rooted into the way some of our supply chain operate. Not all of them, but some of them. And at the other side of the spectrum, the issue for brands is that many consumers in developed countries are actually kind of losing confidence into brands, kind of losing confidence into the quality of the product that we buy, we consume, we eat, etc. Well, many of us are actually asking for more transparency on the products. And so you need to answer that. But the problem for a brand is that on one end, you don't necessarily have the data to answer that. And on the other end, maybe part of what happens, you don't really want to give transparency. You can't really give transparency. So brands are really taken into these two extremes where shit happens, but consumers are requesting more information. So you need to answer that. And it's not only that you need to answer that, but my strong belief is that providing an answer to that is going to be a way for brand to differentiate a lot. I strongly believe that mastering and exposing your supply chain is going to be or is going to become the next important differentiator for brand on the market, or at least that's what we push, and and that's the kind of solution that we want to give to our customers.
So your customers come to you with a problem. What do they say? Why do they want such a solution?
Well, they basically have three viewpoints when they start addressing this question. So the first one is what I just mentioned. It's like transparency. I want to differentiate my brand by proving with facts how good are my products. So that's typically we have this customer. It's a digital native brand. It's called June. They basically sell cosmetics for babies and their mother, and and also baby diapers, etc. And they want to demonstrate the iniquity of their products and how well they master the way their products are manufactured and provided to their customers. So for that, they just expose their entire production chain and the origin of the different materials, different flowers, etc. So it's really brand positioning for them. So it's a way to explain with fact that they manufacture and deliver the best possible cosmetics products for babies. So that's one angle. The second angle is what I call operational control. We work with Danone, so it's large food company, dairy, etc. And among all of their products, Danone make a lot of infant formula. So milk for very, very young infants. The largest market is China. In China, in years 2010, 2015, you had very important counterfeiting issues on different brands of infant formula. Known from Danone, the brands which were concerned were mostly from New Zealand and Australia. But anyhow, this counterfeiting were about mixing milk powder with plastic powder, basically. Okay? So you can imagine you take a 3 months newborn, you give him plastic powder. That's no good for itself. That happens 3 times. Okay? With dramatic consequences from a safety perspective, but with important also consequences for all the brands on the market. Like people just stop buying these products. So Danone decided to launch very large operations to ensure the safety of their product at the finest level, and to be in a position to explain at any point to their consumer that they could trust the Danone products. So what they've done is that they have what we call serialized the boxes of infant formula. So each box is actually marked with an engraved QR code on the box, and the code is holding a unique number for each box of infant formula. And they also serialize all the carton, all the pallets. And what we do is that we ensure the traceability of this infant formula, of this production of infant formula, from the 6 supply points of Danone in the world, the 6 factories, down to the retail points in China. So throughout customs and all the tier 1, tier 2, etc. Wholesalers on China. So we map about 130 warehouses in China, and we collect in real time all inbound flows, outbound flows, order preparations, eventually product destructions when required, which happen in these inventories. We collect all of that, and we bring that back to Danone with value-added information, which are what are the level of stocks, your level of inventories in these third-party warehouses. We We analyze the nature of the flows between the different warehouses. Are they normal or not? Are they planned or not? We verify that there is no dying inventory, so because these are products with an end date, etc. So all sorts of computations on this data. The point really being for Danone to have a control tower in real time of what is happening into its downstream network. And that information can then be used to explain to consumers in China, where does the product come from? Your product has come from this precise factory in Ireland, so the milk was sourced in Ireland. It crossed the Chinese border at that date. That's the CIQ number that proves it. Then it went through that, this, and this warehouses, and that's why you have it in your hands now. So we can actually explain precisely where it comes from, and we have followed this product throughout its life cycle, so you can be confident over it. And the last use case is a slightly different angle. It's when we have customers who want to answer compliance questions. So they have regulatory obligation and we want to answer that. An example of that, for some industrials, you can import raw materials without making ex ante declarations. You just import that. You just tell to the customs that you are allowed to apply a certain level of taxations. You valorize this data for your consumers, for your operations, or for authorities.
So 3 very interesting use cases, 3 different business essences of, why would people need better traceability. You said before that, industries are doing traceability for the last 40 years, but I think that there is traceability and then there is traceability. And I think now is a good time to dive into how you do what you do, right? And I think the part that kind of raised some question marks for me was the blockchain. And as you were speaking, I started understanding why there's a need for blockchain, because no one should be able to penetrate or change or fake the data, right? So if you can describe, in your own words, what you do, how you do it.
Yeah. So our platform is really made of 3 layers, so to speak. So one is a data collection network. So, and that's where we use blockchain. So we deploy a B2B network based on blockchain, and it allows us, the edges, the nodes of this network are our customers and their suppliers. So basically we use blockchain as a way to organize a decentralized data collection over the supply chain. So typically a company like Danone, they install a blockchain node on their own premises. They connect their ERP on the node, and that's the channel that they use to actually declare data over the network. Okay, and each supplier does that and can input data with different means. It can be a mobile app or whatever. So basically, each actor in the supply chain provides a small chunk of the history of the supply chain, history of the product. All data from that network arrive on our platform at the second layer, where we basically take all of the small chunk of information, we aggregate all of them, we normalize the data, we put that into a common and standard model, and then we analyze that and we process it. And it allows us to restitute to our customer a view of how did your supply chain operate according to the declaration of the different stakeholders. And we analyze whether this is coherent. Is that intrinsically coherent, or is that in accordance with your objectives, with the contract that you have with your customer, with the level of inventories you want, etc. Well, so we make all sorts of computation, analysis, etc. And then so that's the second layer, this analysis part. And then the third layer is using this data, so extracting this data for the different use cases that I explained just earlier. So we really use blockchain for two very specific reasons. The first one is that's actually we use it as an easier way to collect data over these very large networks that supply chains are. Small industrials or medium-sized industrials today, in cosmetics, for instance, typically has 200 suppliers. If you want to collect data from 200 suppliers, if you imagine that you're gonna connect the 200 information systems of these 200 suppliers to a single central point, and if you imagine that you're gonna maintain that over time, over the evolutions of these different information system, etc., you are just like completely mistaken. And that's actually why end-to-end traceability doesn't happen today. It's because it's not doable to centralize all of the information from like hundreds of different information systems into a single point. Whereas when you use a decentralized technology, you make this like technical integration, like independent one from the other. So you can deploy progressively and you can maintain progressively. And if you have a failure, then or if you have a problem, then it's just very local and the rest continue to work, etc. So it just makes, from a technical perspective, it makes things doable. And the second reason we use blockchain is what you mentioned. When there is an issue, nobody wants to be responsible. You have a recall on your product, you're an industrial, you have a recall on your product in a district, and your product needs to be removed from the stores from a distributor, and the recall doesn't happen well. That's something that happened like 3 years ago in France and Europe. What happens? Well, the distributor doesn't want to be responsible. So he's going to explain that the fault of the industrial who didn't provide all of the information to do the recall properly. And the industrial doesn't want to be responsible. So he's going to explain that it's the distributor who didn't do his job properly of recalling the product and removing them from the shelves. What blockchain allows is that we remove that kind of discussion. We have proofs of who has provided what information at what point in time. And it's not a question of finger pointing to anyone. It's just a question of, because you know what has happened, then you are in a position to solve what may have happened, like not optimally on, let's say, the recall. So this notion of having an audit trail of who provided which information is a way to improve for everyone. And it's also a good guarantee for all your suppliers to actually share information with you, because then they are sure that you're not gonna reject responsibility in the future over them if they are not responsible for it. So it's at the same time what an enabler for improving supply chains and an enabler for embarking suppliers into sharing information with about what they are doing.
It entirely changes the dynamics across the chain.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it becomes a different discussion altogether. It's not a discussion of pointing fingers. It's more proactive, solution-driven, and what transparency does essentially. So I want to know how, what's your process with a customer? You have a potential customer. How do you go about showing them the solution? How does a POC work? How do you integrate and so on?
Yeah. So it seems stupid to say, but the first thing is to have a clear idea of what you want to do. What's your end game? On the short, even on the short term, what's really your end game? Do you want to have more control over what happens operationally, or do you want to have open a new kind of discussion with the consumer. That's typically two different angles, right? And that needs to be very clear from the get-go. The second thing which is important is that the worst thing that can happen with digital projects is projects that never end, right? You know, like this, like long-lasting projects that nobody wants that. That's always an issue. So the way we take it is that when we start with the customer, is that we decide upfront how long we want the pilot to be. It can be over like 3 months, 4 months, maximum 6 months. But my point of view is that if you don't get value out of a solution like that over like a few months, then you're not gonna get value out of it at all. So you
essentially your process is value driven. You're thinking, can I generate value for the customer?
It's got to be value driven. And the third thing is that that's why actually I don't use the word POC. It really depends what you put behind that, but on a POC, in the sense, if you work on a simulated environment with false data, etc., everything works well, right? I mean, at the end of the day, putting 3 data into a blockchain, that's not rocket science. That's gonna work. Blockchain is a database. You can input data into it. It's not because you call the database a blockchain that makes a difference. So everybody knows how to write data into a database since like 40 years. So that's not the issue. It becomes difficult when you want to scale in the volume of product or in the volume of data sources. And it becomes difficult when you start to be confronted with real data. Getting confronted from day one with real data is absolutely paramount. That's how you start. That's how you do the pilot. Short period of time, objective driven, like clear value, and working on real data. And then the mindset is that's gonna evolve.
Are there any competitors to what you're doing?
Yeah, there are a few. You have big companies like especially on food. You have IBM, which has a solution, IBM Food Trust, Asia or in Europe, usually specialize on specific segments, specific industries, whereas the position we take, that's good or not, and the future is gonna say, but so we tend to be cross-sector. So we today have customers in textile, cosmetics, food, and aeronautics, and there are a lot of similar things between these different supply chains, even though it might seem a bit awkward. So large companies like IBM, a lot of startups usually specialize in one segment. And then there is something a bit different, which is happening from China, where actually providing, how would I say that? Like setting up solution, like traceability solutions based on blockchain technology, has been defined as an important goal by the Chinese Ministry of Technology, as they see providing traceability solutions to industrial all over the world as a way to gain information over the way industrial supply chains work all over the world. So that's like a big subject in China. So yes, to make a long story short, yes, there are a few competitors, but at the end of the day, to put it bluntly, I believe that today we do the job better than most of them. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be here to speak with you, right?
And speak of very impressive use cases and customers, 100%. I mean, I'm convinced, and I wanted to ask one last question. You're collecting a lot of data in order to, provide traceability and transparency. But then, is there anything that you can do with this data, add a layer of insights or anything as a byproduct of what you're doing? And are you leveraging that today, or is there any plan in the future to do that?
That's a very interesting question. We leverage that data for our customers. So typically, when you cross compare data from operations and from consumers scanning the QR code on your product to get transparency, when you cross compare that, you can get insights and detect what people call gray markets or parallel imports. So like abnormalities in your distribution network, basically. And you can do that. We have machine learning algorithms which have been trained to detect that kind of the occurrence of such events. So yes, we can leverage data and provide insights to our customer from that perspective. What we don't do is use data from different customers to build insights for ourselves or to resell data, even like consolidated data to other people. I mean, we deal with B2B information, which are like pretty important for our customers. That's basically the way they operate. So we are contractually committed not to make any use of their data outside of their own specific use case or for their own good. We don't. Yeah. And I think that's pretty important. We are not data resellers. In B2B, I don't really see. I mean, to be honest, in B2C, I think it's a bit awkward. So in B2B, I don't see it.
It's a no-go, yeah. It's a deal breaker, essentially.
Yeah.
You do have to wake up every morning knowing that your customers trust you, and how you use the data might be the first thing that, is related to this trust. I have
Customer
to
trust
say,
is paramount.
is what?
I think customer trust is absolutely paramount. I mean, so.
Yeah. So, kind of like to sum it all up, what I hear is a great cause that led to a very sophisticated solution, out of the box thinking and execution that, we didn't really dive into the details of, the technicalities of how you executed on this solution. But I think from hearing you, we can tell that, there is a lot behind it. There is a lot that needs to work and work well in order for the solution to be available to your customers. And so I wanted to thank you, and I have one last question for you before we depart for today. That's our kind of like way of getting to know you on a personal level more. So I want to know what inspires you, or who.
Oh, that's a difficult one. Well, there can be many answers. There is one person that I think is particularly inspiring. It's Charles Darwin. Darwin. He left England. He was a creationist, and he arrived in the Galapagos, and he saw the animals, and he started to think about how these animals could how they can live, how this typology of animals developed, etc. And over a journey of 20 years, he finally establishes the scientific basis for evolution, for evolutionarism. Yeah. And I think it's fascinating. I mean, this guy just like thought against everything people believed they knew. He thought beyond what he believed, and yeah, and it's put the basis for probably one of the most important scientific discovery of all ages. So it's it's fascinating because to an extremely large extent, I don't even understand how you can make that mental journey. So
Yeah, I thank you. That was actually very inspiring to me as well to hear, your perspective on that and see how you think through things and what you want for yourself and, how you take it to your, day as you wake up in the morning. That's very generous of you. So, with that, I think it's time to wrap up. As much as I would love to continue conversing, um, I really appreciate your time today. And on a
thank you for
personal
your time.
level, thank you. I hope to, see you again in the future, accompany your journey, see Tilkal grow, and see that wonderful cause spread out to throughout the industry.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Bye.